we are going to go to Romans chapter 10. And last week, we went through Romans chapter 9. And it took us 2 weeks. And again, I recorded these things, so if you want the link, I can send it to you. But they're roughly an hour and 45 minutes each. And it's very technical. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. And the church is very divided on that passage. And as we've discussed, it could lead to either a supersessionist view or replacement theology, and that is that the church has replaced ethnic Israel, or remnant theology, and that is that no, there is still value with ethnic Israel. It's just in the future, they will, or those who decide, will come to the faith. Okay, and so, and obviously last week was the real controversial. Hasn't led to anything like bloody in church history. It has led to a lot of arguments and identity issues with church history, but the whole Calvinism and Arminian and election, and I know it can get very technical, but that's Romans chapter 9. Now, remember, Romans 1 all the way to 8 is heavily theological. It deals with salvation. Okay? Deals with salvation. And then Romans chapter 12 all the way to 16 is how you live out that theological understanding of salvation. Okay? Now, you wonder, what about, there's this gap in the middle of chapter 9, 10, and 11. Why is it there? Like, if you read Romans, it would have been a very smooth book as far as practicality. You know, the first 8 chapters, this is the nature of man, this is where Christ came, this is the solution, and then this is how you live it out from chapters 12 to 16. It's not like that. There's chapters 9, 10, and 11, and it's very confusing, okay, to a lot of people. But I think if you understand it, it does make sense when you break it down, okay? And so remember, Paul, after finishing when it comes to salvation, finishing salvation. By the way, you guys don't hear that, do you?
I hear a beep beep.
Yeah, there's a ding. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, there you go. Because I last week I think you guys said you didn't hear it, so I didn't know. You know what I mean? But there you go. You do hear it again, right? So it's so when someone texts me, it goes to my computer, and then everyone hears it. So I'm like, ah. So, the Jewish people. If you read the Old Testament, it is heavily Jewish-centric, I'll say, as far as people group goes, especially Genesis chapter 12, all the way to Malachi. Okay, now, all of a sudden, there's this anticipation for the Jews and their Messiah, who would come from their own, that they'd believe in him, right? And there's this hope. But then you read the New Testament, and for us, we hear of Jesus, but the same people. Remember, this shift really turns away from Jewish people, I would say, from their perspective, right? Jewish people. It really goes on to Christ. They're still there, but it's still now Christ. But what happens is, think of if you're a storyteller, if you're a narrative, and you're still sticking with the Jewish people, it would get really dark, because it would say the Messiah came and they killed him. You see that? And Paul is one of the Jews that does believe, and he's been accused of betraying his own people because he's now an apostle to the Gentiles. And the question comes about, what about the Jewish people, right? Because it's very Jewish centric, and all of a sudden you read the New Testament, and there's an emphasis on Gentiles, on non-Jewish people, right? And Paul addresses this. Okay, so Paul in Romans 9, he addresses and says, man, I'm heartbroken. And Paul's a scholar, Paul's a theologian, but he's not a dead scholar. And he's saying, I am utterly heartbroken. And the question comes about in verse 6, has the word of God failed? Because there's all these promises in the Old Testament, and Paul says, no. But then he breaks down the identity of the Jewish people. He says, not all people, everyone who is Israel. And it's like, wait a moment. He says something very similar in chapter 2, talking about external Israel versus internal Israel. Israel from outside, Israel from inside. And you make a distinction between ethnic Israel, those who are biologically from the tribe of Judah, okay, Jews, versus those who are internally Jews. And essentially what we came to conclude is not the supersessionist replacement theology view, but the remnant view. And that is that there are ethnic Jews that are still here today, even from 2,000 years of diaspora, till 1948, and, Israel and till today. But there are those that will eventually believe. And there are Jews out there, okay? And we call them Messianic Jews. So for me, in this interpretation, I would say that those are the internal Jews. It's those that eventually believe in their Messiah that Paul is talking about. And so chapter 9 is past tense, chapter 10 is present tense, and chapter 11 is future tense. Okay, and today we're going to go just very, very briefly over chapter 10. Okay? So let's all go to Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10, and could somebody read verses 1 to 4? Romans chapter 10, verses 1 to 4.
Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes.
All right, so look at verse 1. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer for God, for them, who's them, is that they, who's they, may be saved. And obviously, it's a continuation from who? The Jews. So right here, Paul is speaking about ethnic Israel here in verse 1. For I bear them witness that they, meaning the Jews, have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. So essentially, Paul in verse 1 and 2 talks about a zeal for God that the Jews have. A zeal for God, but what? Not consistent, not aligned with knowledge. Okay, big, really big. In verse 3, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. So there was an ignorance when it came to their righteousness versus God's righteousness. Okay, now, remember, it's a continuation. So chapters 9, 10, and 11, it's one flow. And we're going on from last week. And remember, the very end of from last week in chapter 9, from verses 25 to 29, remember, Paul quotes the Old Testament, Hosea chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 10, Isaiah chapter 1, and elaborates and says, see, eventually another people group will be part of the family of God. And he ends off from verses 30, this is in chapter 9, to 33 as far as, well, they're just not going to believe. Really going into personal responsibility here. Okay? And Paul reiterates his desire in chapter 10, verse 1, my heart's desire and prayers for them to mean that they may be saved. Very similar to the very beginning of Romans chapter 9, the very beginning. He is grieving in chapter 9. Here, very similar. He reiterates it. Now, when it comes to a zeal without knowledge, okay, this is very common within religious systems, okay? It's possible, okay? Remember, they have a zeal, but it's not rooted in knowledge, biblical knowledge, theological knowledge, therefore it's futile, what Paul is saying. Okay, you can have all the zeal in the world, but if it's not consistent with the real world, it's futile. It's futile. Okay, doesn't make sense. Knowledge without heart. Okay, now you could have knowledge, but you might not have zeal. Okay, that brings about a dead, cold, dry attitude. So if you have knowledge, okay, but you don't have zeal, you don't have a sense of passion for it, you don't have heart, okay, it's very similar to someone like a Pharisee, okay, all theoretical, but dead in heart, okay, very cold, and Jesus he repeatedly calls them out. But here, this is now zeal, but it's not according to knowledge, okay, so if we have zeal, if we have heart, without knowledge, what does that bring about? Fanaticism. Okay, so a fanatic, what that looks like practically in our world, as far as especially when religion is involved, and this is terrorism, right? You ever think of a concept of a person strapping bombs onto them, or training their 6-year-old, 7-year-old son how to kill an infidel? And this is a reality, okay? In the Islamic world, in Wahhabism, or where there's Sharia law and very strict Islamic places, that's zeal. You don't do that with a dead heart. In order to kill yourself, to kill other people, and there's a religious incentive there, that's zeal, but they're dead wrong in that. Okay? And we've discussed this in my Islamic talk, that Islam is a false religion. Muhammad is a false prophet. His whole message came about by an apparent angel, but from a Christian worldview, we know that's a demon. We know that we know it's a demon. Galatians 1:8. Okay, so zeal without knowledge. We've seen recent events of zeal without knowledge. In the last, I'd say, 10 years, there's been the rise of something called wokeism that we're all familiar with, that has evolved into what it is today. That in my opinion, I'm seeing it's going to die with this new presidency. But we've seen very bizarre things in our lifetime that we're going to have to question. I can't believe that happened in the modern world, right? Something like transgenderism, or the LGBTQ flag, and all these different views of immigration and what we're seeing. I think we've seen that actress, singer Selena Gomez this week. She was like the face of, a lot of people were laughing and mocking her through the whole week because of her crying, her zeal. But the backlash was, it's not according to what? Knowledge. It's inconsistent with reality. Okay? The only people that have been arrested so far are rapists, murderers, and they have this on camera. Okay? So again, zeal without knowledge, and we've seen this. Now, the zeal that Paul is talking about is one that is of righteousness. Okay? One that is of personal righteousness in verse 3. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God, that's what we want. The righteousness of God, and seeking to establish their own righteousness, they did not submit to God's righteousness. So they sought their own form of righteousness. Okay? Now, is it possible as a human, and you can speak from your personal experiences, to pursue your own standard of righteousness? So you do something. Religious righteousness I'm talking about. Is it possible?
Was that a question?
Yeah, it's a question. So from your own journey, and I'm talking about your heart, your mind, like what's inside of you, you're pursuing things, religious things, but subconsciously you're doing it because essentially you're trying to elevate your own righteousness. You feel good about it, better about yourself in relationship to God. It's not according to knowledge. It's not consistent with the Bible, but you're just doing it. Right? So for example, when I just got saved, I remember I started reading books and theology and all, and I would read of different historians and people in church history, and then we would always go to the Puritans, and there were a group in the Americas that wanted to birth away from the Anglican Church. Actually, people think it's a Catholic Church. Well, it's the Anglican Church because they were close to the Catholic Church, and they had to purify themselves. But some of them, like Jonathan Edwards, and they would wake up like at 5 a.m. and would read for 2 hours of the Bible, and that's the way they would start their day. And, me, I'm really young at this, and all of a sudden I think to myself, man, I want that, or I want to do that. So I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, get my Bible, and I'd read. I didn't have to get up at 5. It's not like I have work at 7. I just got up at 5. I'd read, and I'd finish it, and then I'd forget what I completely forgot what I was written. It didn't penetrate my heart. But there was a part of me where I felt good about myself because I woke up at 5 o'clock. I could say I woke up at 5 and I read the Bible, even though I went back to sleep after. You see that? And it's not the act of wake up at 5 in the morning and reading it. It's the heart behind it. It's the heart behind that says that you are better. So if someone wakes up at 9 o'clock in the morning and reads the Bible, you're lazy. I woke up at 5. But it's the heart. You see that? And what I'm saying is, like, I'm not alone on that. And according to what Paul is saying, a lot of people, if you see other world religions, and why do they do what they do? A lot of it comes down to, I need some sense of righteousness. It's not consistent with God. And that's what Paul is trying to call out here. Okay? Look at verse 4, guys. Look at verse 4. For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone who believes. Okay? So, now, here, notice this though. For Christ is the end of the law. What does he mean by that? You ever hear that? Christ is the end of the law. What does that mean?
It means like the end of the requirement to adhere to. It just means like, it's like the end of having to keep it in such a way where that's what happened in the old covenant. So it's like they kept the law and the strict standards, and then they made sacrifices if it didn't end up right, and then so it's like the end of the law because the Spirit's coming, because the law it's in the word where it says like the law brings death, but the law is the letter brings death, but the Spirit brings life. There's a scripture, I forgot what it is.
Yeah. Or Christ came to fulfill the law. You ever hear that? Christ came to fulfill the law. But when he says, for Christ is the end of the law, for the righteous to everyone who believes. Remember this. In the Old Testament, and this is even till today, the Jewish mindset, or any religious mindset, and remember, it goes back to incentives, really. It goes back to your why to life. The knowledge of Christ being the end of the law it's for righteousness' sake. Okay, so if you have the law, remember, does the law still apply to Christians today? Yes.
Yes.
The law of God still applies for the Christians today in many ways. Okay, one practically, and this is why we should have the law, right? You ever hear of these discussions of like the 10 Commandments being put, in public schools? I think it was JFK that took them out, I believe so, or taking prayer out of schools. Regardless of that debate, the reason why I think a 10 Commandments is good is because they're guardrails. They restrain us. You see? It's a very basic principle, and I'm hoping the California government can see this, but when you remove laws or you lower standards, you lower the ethical standards of humanity. So naturally, people want things. And if I say that $950 is a misdemeanor, no longer a felony, guess what? People are going to be incentivized to what? Steal. Basic. So the law really guides humanity as far as what's right and what's wrong. Now, this is why we still need the law today. But notice how within that discussion, there's no discussion of salvation. I never said anything between my heart and God. And that was the error that a lot of people treated the law. So before, and a lot of people, even a lot of Christians today, is that when there's the law of God, we treat the law of God in order for my heart to be righteous. It's for my heart to be righteous or right with God. Okay? Remember this. It's impossible, and we're going to go this. We're going to see this in our next point here in the next couple of verses. That it's impossible. Okay? So what Christ did is that he was the only human in global history to live perfectly, to live a perfect life under the law, and as a result, his sacrifice on the cross was approved by God, and that sacrifice is applied to me. So now when I obey the law, I'm not obeying the law for the sake of me to increase in righteousness. I already am righteous. I already am perfect. As a result, I can obey the law freely, not for righteousness' sake, though. So what changes is my incentives, my attitude towards the law. Okay? If I am righteous because of Christ, okay, I can now look to the law as the way I described it to you, for my sake, because of my sinful nature, because of my ego problem, and all of ours too, right? We all have a flesh issue, that we're all about ourselves, and as a result, it gives societal order. But without the knowledge of the righteousness of Christ, I treat the law for my elevation of righteousness. And it doesn't work that way. And this is what Paul is trying to communicate. Christ is what? The end of the law. Okay, he's the end of the law, meaning you don't have to go to the law to increase your righteousness. You don't have to go to the law for what? Your own salvation. Totally changes everything. If I go to the law for my own righteousness, oh man, guess what I'm naturally going to do? And I think this is all of us, and you'll see it. Is I'll put on a persona. I'll act like I'm better than I really am, right? Doesn't work that way. So I'm not really being genuine with my own heart and who I really am. So if I treat the law as if I'm already there, I'm already righteous in Christ, again, there's a liberty to it. I can start from brokenness. I can work out versus I put on a persona and act as if this is who I am. Big difference. There's a lot of liberty when all of a sudden you treat the law as if it was supposed to be. And remember, it was fulfilled by Christ. So righteousness doesn't come from the law. It comes from Christ. But now there's a liberty that I have. I don't have to be perfect. I acknowledge it, and I work from that point on. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
If you read 2 Corinthians 3:6, you want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, hold on, let me find it. Where's Corinthians? Who has made us, I'll just read 5, not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything is coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life.
Wow. Wow. Can we go to Romans 5 to 8? Can someone read? Romans 10, 5 to 8.
For Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. The man who does those things shall live by them. But the righteousness of faith speaks in this way. Do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down from above, or who will descend into the abyss, that is, to bring Christ up from the earth, from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach.
So now you see in verse 5 where it says, for Moses writes of the righteousness that is based on the law. What he's quoting here, Paul's paraphrasing Leviticus chapter 18, verse 5. It says, you shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. Okay? For Moses writes about the righteous that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. Problem is with that, okay, there's two ways as far as living in the sense, two ways of righteousness. That is to be completely perfect, and it's kind of what I was saying before. You can live by the law, but if you do live by the law, in order to get this righteousness, you gotta do it perfectly. You gotta do it perfectly. And to my knowledge, it doesn't work with humanity. It only worked with Christ, right? And then verse 6, 7, and 8, Paul quotes Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 12 to 14, which says, it is not in heaven that you should say, who will go to heaven for us and bring it to us, that we may hear to do it. Neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it. And the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it. Okay? So, essentially what Paul is saying is accepting the righteousness that comes from Christ. Because remember, essentially, there's a futility in self-righteousness versus righteousness by faith. In Leviticus chapter 18, verse 5, which Paul paraphrases, essentially, this right here, hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Essentially, this is impossible. And people have been doing it for so long. People have tried to live under the law, but remember, it goes back to incentives. What's your justification? What's your reasoning for doing this? And if you have a heart that says, I'm going to follow the law for my own righteousness' sake, guess what? It's impossible. It's impossible. Verses from verse 6 to 8, the righteousness that comes from Christ. Again, what it does to us practically, it's a huge difference. We live from righteousness, meaning we're free, or we live for righteousness, and as a result, we're a slave. It's impossible. Big difference. The perfection of Christ goes upon me. This is 2 Corinthians 5:21. He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God through him. Okay? Once that is attained, then all of a sudden, I live from a place of righteousness. From it. So I already am. Versus you're living for it. You're going to be questioning yourself, insecure, if that's the case. Big difference. Okay? For us, we can be truly honest with ourselves and we can be truly free today. We deal with our sin nature, but if you accept the righteousness of God, there is a liberty that comes with it. Okay? Any questions?
What was that verse in Corinthians you did?
2 Corinthians 5:21. It's about the propitiation,
5:21.
propitiation of Christ. Yeah. Okay. Can someone read verse 9, 9 to 10? 9 to 10. Romans 10, 9 to 10.
that if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confesses is made unto salvation.
Amen. So this is like our so every world religion has their own like creed or saying. So like in Islam, it's called the Shahada. I think we talked about this before. The Shahada. It's like the moment of confession. So a person will go to a mosque and there'll be witnesses there, and then you have to say in Arabic that there's only one God and Muhammad is his final prophet. So in Arabic, La ilaha Allah Muhammad Rasulullah Allah. You say that, and you say that on a microphone, and everyone starts clapping. And nowadays, it's like people love social media, so they get their phone and they record the non-Arab or the white American, and and it's a bragging right that they'll have. It's a thing. And then in Judaism, it'll be Deuteronomy 6:4. Theirs is the Shema Israel Adonai. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. For us, I guess, growing up, that is like in evangelicalism, it's always Romans chapter 10 verse 9, right? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe that God raised him from the dead, what? You shall be saved. Okay, what Paul is now doing here, remember, he's talking about the Jews have all this zeal, but it's not consistent with knowledge. And remember, he quotes the Old Testament, he quotes the book of Leviticus, the book of Deuteronomy to show, look, they're attaining their own righteousness by their own works. They're misusing the law. They're misusing. They missed it. Okay, but essentially, this righteousness comes through faith in Christ. And what does he say now? He talks about preaching. Hi, Danny.
I'm sorry I'm so late, everybody.
Well, guys, we're going to close in the next 2 minutes now, so let's close in prayer. No, I'm just joking.
I'm sorry. I was talking to a friend of mine that's got dementia. I haven't talked to him in a long time, and I couldn't get off, so there's my excuse.
Oh, no worries.
I'm sorry. I was looking forward to this. I apologize to everybody, and I was shut up.
No, you're good, Danny. You're good. I was, if you can, now, remember, verse 9, it's the need, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. This, some people, I listen to historians and liberal conservative scholars when it comes to, people talk about the end of the Roman Empire. I think I've discussed this with you, like the different philosophies of it. Well, you'll hear a lot of some liberal historians that say the reason why the Roman Empire, what made the Roman Empire collapse is Christianity. But it had to do with allegiance, because remember, before Christianity, where did you place your allegiance?
That's right.
Caesar. Before Christianity, you right? It was. Caesar was Lord, right? But then all of a sudden when Christianity came, there was a switch. And remember, Christianity spread. Like they tried, remember, the Jew, we think that Christianity is the only religion that were persecuted by the Romans. The Romans did a successful job at completely wiping out religions. I don't know if you knew that, right? Where did the Sadducees go? You ever hear about the Sadducees? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they're gone. So after 70 AD, done. Right? There were four sects of Judaism. Only the Pharisees survived. So the Jews that you see today, the Hasidics, the Orthodox, those are the remainder of the Pharisees. They really survived. So I'm just saying the Romans, the Christians weren't the only ones. The Romans were. The Jews were. Remember in 70 AD they wiped. But there was others too. Kevin, did you have a question?
Well, the irony in the Roman history is that, it's like Caesar wanted to be called Lord, and then their leadership, they were known as God. And then, and then they crucified the Lord of Lords, and then, they crucified the Son of God. So it was just the irony behind all that, and the true kingdom is, stands, and the imposter has fallen. So it's like,
well,
I just find it interesting.
Well, here's what happened. It's a bad argument, first of all, but it did play on with people's allegiances. Okay, but again, like to say that there was the allegiance to Caesar therefore made the success of the Roman Empire. No, it was a hit or miss, kind of like the United States president. Like it's like you don't know who you're gonna get, right? At least here we vote, or you can vote, but there it was depending on the what era. It was bloodline. It was merit based upon who was around. But there was a case. It was the Emperor Theodosius, and this is around close to the end of the Roman Empire, like the Western Rome. So the Western Rome collapsed in 476, and the last emperor was a 16-year-old. Okay, Augustulus. Romulus Augustulus. He was a 16-year-old, and they carried him off, and that was it. But before was Theodosius, and he was an emperor, and there was Saint Ambrose of Milan. Okay, if you don't know Saint Ambrose of Milan, he was obviously a saint in the Catholic Church, but Saint Ambrose was Saint Augustine. I don't know if you know Saint Augustine. He heavily was influenced by Saint Ambrose, and he was a bishop in Rome. And what happened was that Theodosius slaughtered a couple hundred people, and it was a bloodbath, and it was unjustified apparently. And the bishop, he's not even the Pope. He was a bishop. Saint Ambrose excommunicated the Emperor of Rome. Yeah, while Rome was still intact. So it was a power move. It was a big move in Roman history, in the sense of, wow, this bishop, or this whatever you want to call him, in the sense of this religion that they used to kill for fun, under Caesar or under Nero, is now telling the Caesar of Rome what to do. Right? This really happened, and it was a big move. Right, so if people attribute that to, I guess, the collapse of the Roman Empire, there's no logic to it. Like, I don't see how you lose people, you lose your army, it's a bad economy, all that stuff. I don't see the logic. But anyways, my point is this. Jesus is Lord. Okay, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and what? Believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And this is the solution right here to the Jews. Remember, he's building up his case for what the Jews need, and this is where the Jews, this is why they don't believe and all. But at the end of the day, what the message for the Jews? It's a message for everyone, really. But here, Paul is speaking to the Jews as far as this is what they need. What do the Jews need? And remember, chapter 10 is present, chapter 11 is future, and I'll say chapter 10 is still present, if I were to be honest, or chapter 10 is present even till today, if I were to be. But what did the Jews need in the first century? If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Okay, so it's who Jesus was, but it's what he did. So remember this. During the time of Christ, Jesus was here, and you read in the Gospels. Okay, you read in the Gospels. Remember, who's Book of Romans? Jew, Gentile, Paul, and now he's speaking to the Jews. Remember, the Jewish people, when Christ was there, what was the message that Christ was really bringing to them? Like, you got a lot of messiahship. Christ was the Messiah, right? Believe in him as the Messiah. And that was a real emphasis when he was there. And all of a sudden, in the book of Acts, he's still the Messiah, but now it's his work. There's an emphasis on his work. You see what I'm saying? So first it was just his messiahship. It was the who, but then later on it became who and now what. And that is, what are we going to believe in? Events. Because there's the person, there's the identity of Christ, which, if you know church history, for the first 1,000 years, there were constant debates but the identity of Christ. Who is he? But here, remember, Paul is speaking to the Jews. To speaking to a Jew, easy. What? And what I mean by that is, what did he do? Well, if you believe with your heart that Jesus is the Lord, but that God raised him from the dead, you should be saved. The gospel. That part right there, even till today, both of them actually, both premises, it's very hard for a Jew to get their mind meaning that Jesus was God, but then that Jesus died on the cross. They don't believe that. The Messiah is not supposed to die. They'll say the Old Testament doesn't talk about it. Right? So this is the solution to the Jewish problem right here. And then in verse 10 verse 10 he reiterates that, for with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. So right here, this is salvation. Okay? Now, remember, salvation is from the heart, but the heart will lead to confession. Salvation is a matter of the heart, but this heart, this soul, will lead to confession. Okay? So, theoretically speaking, if you talk to a person that was just mute for the rest of their life, is it possible for them to be saved because they can't confess? Of course it is. Of course it is, because their heart. Okay? But naturally, a very influential carpenter in the first century once said, from the abundance of the heart, what? The mouth speaks. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I think Paul would, again, being very practical here. At the end of the day, salvation comes from the human heart. Do you believe that Christ is Lord? Does your heart believe the identity of who Jesus was? He's the true Messiah. But do you believe that he, the first century figure, Jesus of Nazareth, he resurrected from the dead? Those two right there. This is the very essence of Christianity. People, we debate the Bible all the time. You know, Catholics believe in 73 books. Protestants believe in 66. The Ethiopian Orthodox, they believe in 81. We have all these different, the Eucharist, all these differences. This right here is the essence of what it means to be a Christian. From your heart. Do you believe that Christ was the Messiah? Yes or no? And number two, what did he die and resurrect from the dead? Yes or no? If it's a yes to both of them, salvation from the human heart. If it's coming from your heart. Okay?
I got a question.
Yeah.
If it comes, intellectually speaking, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, and you expect that on an intellectual basis, saying, hey, it makes sense. I've read Josh McDowell, and I've read all that stuff, and I know the prophecies concerning the Messiah. Yeah, I believe. Does somebody have to need a Messiah emotionally and intellectually, or can you just intellectually say, okay, well, he's the Messiah? My point is, if you don't need the Messiah, if you don't need God in your life, like you said, the heart will lead to confession. So you can just believe intellectually. I'm trying to divide the two. Is there a division between the two?
Yes, there is a division between the two. Remember, the emphasis is your heart. Do you believe from your heart? I can believe. There's a lot of things I believe in, right? But do you believe it wholeheartedly? Okay, so a simple acknowledgement of one of the primary reasons why I'm a Christian is because I like history, and no, it's I don't take this on blind faith. I really don't, and I don't think you should too. I want every single one of us to question things, to own certain things. Right? I want you to really be honest about your belief system, because a lot of people, they believe things for years and years and years, and then they go through some midlife crisis, or they go through some tragedy, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if I believe that anymore. And we have the deconstruction movement, and on and on and on, and you see it all the time. That's what I'm saying. I always tell people, you have to own your own thoughts. You have to own your own beliefs. But cognitively, is it sufficient for someone just to believe first century figure of Jesus of Nazareth? Yeah, he existed. We know he died. Those two things we're certain about. Another thing we're certain about, and here's a gap, we'll jump, is that the Roman Empire, that one of the most, no, the most powerful empires that's existed, I would say, in the world. The longevity, and you can make a case for that, but changed, and not only changed, it changed with a small religion that they tried to eliminate, and they couldn't. Every single time it's like a fire. They tried to remove the fire. It got worse. It just kept spreading. And what I'm saying is, if he never died, if Jesus never died, then why go through all this? Paul, Peter, all these figures in church history. Why go through this? Right? If he didn't, just live your life, right?
Here's my question. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I asked it incorrectly. Yes, no, and he rose from the dead also. And that's if without the resurrection, then we don't really have much, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, is there a difference from needing salvation? You said the heart will lead to confession. Confession of what? Do we have to need the Messiah? Do we have to understand the Christ and the crucifixion and realize that we need him? Is my question.
Needing in what sense, Danny? Needing
salvation from ourselves. I mean, needing that we are our own gods. I mean, when somebody comes to Christ, and in my case, I'm not going to talk about my case, but I'm saying,
I see what you mean.
Is it a necessity to say, okay, I accepted Christ in my heart? Okay, and there's been a change in my life, and it's not just going to Sunday school at 9 and going to worship at 10:30. I had in my life, and I'm not saying that my salvation's better than anybody. We come to Christ different ways. I understand that. That's why I think some people believe wholeheartedly in certain doctrines because of the way they came to Christ, and that's where their foundation is. Is there a necessity to, after you confess your sins, to realize that you have needed a Messiah or a God in your life?
I think to truly embrace Christ as Lord, you have to need it. You have to need Christ. Ironically, I have a friend that lives 10 minutes away, that he's there right now in Los Angeles, but he's doing an interview with Way of the Master. I don't know if you guys know Ray Comfort and Way of the Master, but they were really popular maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and they would go up to people and they would record it. What's his name? The actor Kirk Cameron was part of it, and they would go up to people. It was a big deal like 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. But they would go up to people and say, like, do you need a savior? And like, no, I don't need Jesus. And then they'll read out the 10 Commandments, and they'll say, so have you ever lied? Yeah, I lied. Have you ever stole anything? I guess I stole. Well, they go through the list, and then Ray Comfort, that's the guy. He'll say, so he has his thick Australian accent. He's like, so you're lying, you're a lying, cheating, backstabbing murderer. What do you think you go to heaven or hell? Like hell, I guess. So it and the emphasis, and we had this discussion. They came to the Master Seminary where we had this discussion about this topic, and essentially, in order to come to Christ, you have to need Him. So let me counter what you're saying with someone that believes in the resurrection, with someone that believes that Jesus is Messiah, with someone that believes that Jesus is Lord, but doesn't need Him. Satan. So you have Mark chapter 5. And Legion, a man that's possessed by multiple demons, sees Christ, naturally bows down and says, you are Christ, the Son of the Most High Living God. James chapter 2, it says, demons believe and they what? They shudder. So, right. Does Satan know that Jesus resurrected? Yeah, he knows that. Does Satan know that he's... Yeah, he knows. Does he know that he's God? Yeah, he knows it. But he doesn't need him. He doesn't care. And that's what I'm saying. So I'm just saying, intellectually, it's not enough. Let me even go even further. Jews, there were Jewish leaders in the book of John. In the book of John, it says they believed. Some Jews believed, but back to honor and shame, they did not want to say they believe. They did not want to confess their belief because of because they didn't want to get kicked out of the temple. Reputation, ego, image, persona. You see that? So they believe. They're people. Could you believe that? They were people that believed that Jesus was who he said he was. First century. Jews, not Satan, not demons, people. But they refused to because they didn't see the, they didn't see the need. And what I'm saying, they didn't see the need was that they're more concerned of their reputation, their honor. They wanted that image, their Instagram image to be preserved, right?
Just like this election. I mean, there's a lot of people that are coming out of the closet that said, yeah, I voted for him, but I was afraid that somebody's going to break my windows in my house if I put Trump. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. All of a sudden, these people come out and say, oh, yeah, I did last time too, and blah, 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 blah. So the peer pressure, that's why, correct me if I'm wrong, these are my mother, these are my fathers. You drop everything and follow me. I'm the number one. I mean, I'm the priority, but no, the peer pressure is the son of a gun. In religion, in those times of being a Jew, I bet you it was phenomenal. It had to be. You lose everything.
I can really break that down, what you just said psychologically. Like it implies so much. It implies that you're still about yourself. It implies, you know what I mean? Like when you say reputation, it just, I can, to be honest, I can see right through that and be, this is what this person believes in. And like, there's been many, Carl Jung, Freud, many people have written about that as far as the natural tendency to project, right? And Carl Jung, his dad was a pastor. His dad was a theologian, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I read 2 of his books. I'm a fan up to a point. I didn't know that. I have to read more.
Yeah. Carl Jung says, I know that God, I don't believe that God exists. I know that God exists. And me too, that's where I stand. Like,
But what does it mean, the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks? So it's not just, out of your heart, but the abundance of the heart. Is that like a different meaning, like in the Greek or something? Because remember in heaven, when they get to meet Jesus, and he says, I never knew you, depart from me, but we did everything in your name. But he says, I didn't know you at all. So something about the abundance of the heart must be like complete devotion, given wholly, and that means you repented of your sin and turned the other way, right?
Yeah, and again, Matthew 7, what you quoted, it does divert to a different discussion, but relevant. And what I mean by that Matthew 7 screams Romans 1, 2, and 3. And what I mean by that is that's how deceitful the human heart could, what it could do to a person. So when I read, remember when I spoke on vainglory, I used that passage, Matthew 7. But I truly believe those people in Matthew 7, even though it's theoretical, it never happened, right? But it's just saying there will be on that day, many people will say, Lord, Lord. But what I'm saying is, I believe that in that passage and in the future, when that moment does happen, I believe there's going to be a lot of sincere people, that they truly, from the bottom of the heart, believe that they serve God, that they did strap bombs around them and blew themselves up. You name the world religion, you name it, even the Christian missionary, the Mormon, right, etc., that they truly believe that they were serving God. But it went back to the very beginning of Romans chapter 10 that I said, was that what's their incentive? Is it to build righteousness, or is it to come from righteousness? That changes everything. If it's for righteousness' sake, then I still can cognitively believe in God, but guess who I'm serving? Me. But the deceitful part is I don't know that. And that's why people are in year 40, are in year 50 of Mormonism or whatever religion that they're in, still doing what they're doing, or let's call it the pastor who is on year number 40, year number 50, but is an angry man. That's a drunk inside. That's very cold towards his wife and children. That has no relationship, but it's more about his image. Happens all the time.
Oh,
right?
David Tripp.
Right? So
The
What about Paul
I
Tripp,
think
Danny?
it froze.
What about Paul Tripp, Danny?
No, I'm saying that that's what happened to him, and I'm a fan of his. Okay, I read his books. I think you've met him. I know that you met him, and we talked about that. But it came to a point, where he did that whole book on Romans in the Greek, and he had a real thick, information that he's going to go ahead and give to his church or the people he's teaching to. Then he realized not one thing did he look at the whole book of Romans that applied to himself.
Yeah.
And that's when his wife said, hey, you ought to be lucky, that I'm this and I'm that and everything else. And, 95% of the people, the women out there would like me. And he told, and Paul Tripp's wife said, well, put me into 5%. Well, that humbled him very much because it wasn't a personal thing. And that changed him around to a personal relationship with Christ because he failed. He was not a good husband. And the realization, and I'm not picking on him, but this is exactly what we're talking about. I didn't know you. I healed in your name. I didn't know you. This type of thing. So, yes, I don't mean to take up too much time. But yes, I've talked to people that their testimony, so to speak, and I said, well, it's quite a bit of difference than when you were out there drinking and whoring around it. Well, not really. Not really. I said, you haven't seen a major difference since you accepted Christ? Not really. Like that. I said, okay. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be judging, but for me to say that, there's a major difference in mine. And I'm no saint, man. I'm still not, obviously.
No.
I recognize the difference from when I accepted Christ to my belief system and my loneliness and my drunkenness and all the whatever. I know that day. I know what happened. You understand? And that's why I ask you intellectually. You must be born of the Spirit and, born of the flesh and born of the Spirit. It's a spiritual thing, which is you become as a baby and you're sincerely asking help through Christ. That's how I understand it.
Yeah. Well, the heart. What's good about this passage is he talks about the heart. You have to believe in your what? Heart. You see what I'm saying? So it really, if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So it really goes on to this, it eliminates the whole Matthew 7, bad motives. I'm familiar with Paul Tripp's, I guess, transformation. I'm very familiar with what happened to him, but
Is it 9:10? Excuse me. Is this Romans 9:10?
Yes, Romans 10, verse 9 to 10. Yes. Yeah.
10,
So,
not 10. Okay.
yeah.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Kevin? Give me your hand up.
So, Matthew 7, I was just reading it, and I felt like I had I feel like God pointed something out to me. But it says, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy? And then fast forward, and then it says, do many mighty works. And, to piggyback off of what you were saying, are you working from righteousness or are you working for righteousness? And so that's kind of the dinger or the light bulb moment in this passage where it says many mighty works. That sounds like someone would say we did many and we did many mighty works. So it sounds like kind of boasting in works. And we're only saved by the grace of God. We have to accept the gift of Jesus Christ. And we don't perform for God because that doesn't save us. It's the performance of a lifetime through Jesus Christ that only saves.
Yeah.
And through his grace and mercy, of which he is the only holder and possessor of those attributes. And so now it's I understand. Because it's kind of intimidating when you read it and you're like, oh no, but it's if you know God's heart and, his word, then he illuminates it for you and you don't have to be scared because you know his heart.
Yeah.
You know the heart of God when you know his word. You don't know his heart if you don't know his word. You can't be led by the Spirit of the Lord if you're not reading his word and know his word, because his word is pure and we're not, and we can confidence by reading his word. So it's just like a light bulb like just goes off in my head when I see that.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. At the end of the day, I think what all of us are really asking is like, how do you know? You know what I mean? Like, how do you, like the heart, like how do you, because again, we're saying that people could believe in the resurrection and believe in the Messiahship of Christ, but again, Matthew 7, I never knew you, right? And how do you really know? And I would say that it does come down to that righteousness incentive, right? Am I doing it for righteousness' sake, or am I doing it from? Big difference, right? And if you are coming if you're doing it for, then the implication is you're still living for you. You're still living for you. So you could read the Bible, you can go to church, you can check out, even in a Protestant, even whatever you name it. You can even believe in good theology, just like Satan himself. But if your incentives are wrong, you're still doing it for you. Then yeah, there's a very good chance of you being in the Matthew 7 category. Yeah. So I think what makes a lot of people safe when they read Matthew 7 is they're like, I don't claim to prophesy. I don't claim to X, Y, and Z. But they do. There's some other sub claiming that they do. So the Mormon will claim, well, I was on a missionary for 2 years, or I was on and on and on. Just fill it in. But it does come down to, is this person, have they died to themselves? Really? Okay? I got to speed up here, guys. So from the heart, one believes, but from the heart, confession happens. Okay? So if the heart is true, confessions happen. And this is why we, as the church, for thousands of years, have had something called confessions, have had something called creeds after an event happens. So the Council of Nicaea, 325, the Nicene Creed, it's always responsive, but there's always creeds that happen, okay? Remember, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Okay, but the problem is this, and I think we could see it with church history, is when you have creeds, is when you have councils, okay, is when you have confessions, and you write them down, and you memorize them, and you know them, there's a good chance that you could know the creed, you could know the confession, but you might have a dead heart. And this is why there's always movements away from traditionalism, movements away from Roman Catholicism, movements away from Orthodoxy. And it's not them in and of itself, it's the traditional part of it. Is because people see the danger of being, like me, I love tradition. I think tradition is a good thing, right? We all have tradition, right? I wake up in the morning, I'll have 2 cups of alkaline water, I have coffee. It just, we have our routines, right? You try not looking at your phone, all these routines that we have. These are traditions. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just when we lose the heart of the tradition, when we lose the heart of the confession, and we deceive ourselves into thinking that we believe because I memorized a confession. I've memorized the Westminster Confession of Faith or the Heidelberg, on and on and on. But my heart hasn't changed. That's where that's where you got to watch out for that. Remember, it starts with a changed heart and it leads to a mouth that confesses, inside out. Okay. Verse 11-13. Can someone read? Verse 11-13.
11:13.
Chapter 10, verse 11 and 13.
For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved.
Okay, so here, verse 11, where for the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. This is Isaiah 28, verse 16. Paul quotes, and then he continues. Now, listen to the equilibrium in verse 12. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. Remember, Paul is speaking to who? To the Jews. And what are the Jews? What have they done for centuries? Nationalism, right? I'm a Jew, I'm ethnically Jewish, therefore favor of God, therefore blessings. But now he's talking, there's no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same as the Lord of all, bestowing his riches, on all who call on him. So now it doesn't necessarily mean, the implication is it's now about who those who call upon the name of the Lord, those who have faith. And then verse 13, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And here he quotes Joel chapter 2, verse 32. Okay, so now we're at a true place of equilibrium. Okay, meaning that it's Jew and Gentile, anyone that believes here. Okay, so he goes back to chapter 9. How do you know who's the real Israelites? It's those who believe. And this is what Paul is trying to urge them. He's trying to saying, hey, look, it's on your end if you call upon the name of the Lord from your heart. Okay?
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, Danny?
I know you're behind.
No,
But 11 of my translation says, 11, as the scriptures tell us, everyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. So believes, trust, was trust more valid?
Yeah, no, I would say these are semantics here. It's just different nuances. Trust, believe. You know, I say surrender. Like I was having a discussion with a friend of mine today, like just saying like I could sum up every problem, spiritual, political, like you name it, like worldview. The human heart, and I can say this 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, if we're still alive 4,000 years ago from today, we all have a soul that cannot submit. We have a soul that cannot submit. We want what we want. And once that soul learns how to submit, it's beautiful. It's a trust. Once I submit, I naturally trust. I have faith. Okay? Because what I'm doing when I'm submitting, I'm essentially saying I don't trust in myself. I'm not putting faith in myself, because we naturally do. Right? So, does that make sense, Danny?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
No, absolutely. No, it doesn't. I definitely believe in that. No, submitting. There's a certain freedom, amount of freedom in commitment itself, and that's something I learned. You know, as a new Christian. Not that I'm not blowing smoke.
No, like
yes, there's a certain amount of freedom in commitment.
Even when it comes to, say, any addiction group or whatever it is, I would really, you want to hash it out to a person. There's a substance, but there's a desire behind the substance. And there's a submission that needs to happen with that desire. We all have desires. Some are stronger than others. I understand that. But again, what it comes down to is a submission to you, right? Because we want what we want. And the person that doesn't learn that, you can kind of see where their life is going to go, if I were to be honest, right? So it really does come down to submission. Okay, submission, trust. Submission, faith. Okay. Verse 14 to 17. Romans chapter 10, verse 14 to 17.
How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. But they have not all obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of God.
So, verse 14 and 15, the message of the good news is communicated through human beings. And Paul quotes here Isaiah 52, verse 7, and essentially from verse 16 to 17, but they not all obeyed the gospel, the Jews. And then he says, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? And here he quotes Isaiah 53, verse 1. Okay, so essentially meaning, remember, from verse 9, 10, 11, it is all about, verse 9, 10, 11, what does he say? It's all about those, salvation comes from the heart. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God is risen from the dead, you shall be saved. But not a lot of Jews believe, and there's a solution to that, is that we preach to them. Verse 14 to 17. Okay, so the message, the good news, what the Jews need, everyone, but in this context the Jews need, is they need the gospel to be communicated, and that's going to happen through humans. Okay, verse 16, 17, not all Israel will believe or believes, and it was predicted in the book of Isaiah. Okay, so if you just think of this in the sense of salvation, it's the gospel, and what we spoke about last time, there's an equilibrium, it's for everyone. But that gospel, which is for everyone, is communicated through humans, people. Okay, the need for the gospel to be communicated vocally, or nowadays through social media, tweets, whatever, right? Before, this application would be applied to, you go downtown Los Angeles, you go downtown, and you present the gospel, you preach the gospel, you give out tracts. Now you start an Instagram, you start a TikTok account, and you just talk about the Bible. And that's what's going on. And that's what's going on in the world. Okay, so essentially, we need to preach the gospel. Okay, you, me, all of us. There are people out there that have questions, that are confused, that need the gospel communicated to them verbally. Okay, there's a famous quote, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. Has anyone heard that quote before? Preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. Mother Teresa said that. I love Mother Teresa, but she's wrong on this part. Okay, preach, and I take that back. I understand what she's trying to say in the sense of like maybe there was, fundamentalism was the time that she was a Christian. There was a lot of talking, not enough doing. So she went to Calcutta and, started her hospital. And I love her ministry, love her work. It's just, I think she was being emphatic because of what she was dealing with. But really, in essence, practically speaking, no, you have to use words. Preach the gospel when necessary, but no, you have to use words. It's impossible. Okay? Any questions?
Do you think that
Go ahead.
I know how sayings get popularized throughout, the just in life. Is there it just seems like it's not, it's like a half truth. It's kind of I could be wrong, but just me analyzing it, it's kind of use words if necessary when it says, that when the Bible says that, faith comes from hearing and hearing through the word of Christ. So it's it just seems like it's not true. It's kind of true, but it's not. I don't know. It's just the way I think. It's to me, it's kind of weird,
Yeah. Well, the messages could be lost, right? Here, that Mother Teresa quote, the message that could be lost is, well, we're not going to even preach the gospel at all. We're just going to live. And a lot of people have done that. If you see open air preaching, we've all seen open air preachers, right? And then you're going to hear, you'll always hear, and I've seen this, you'll hear people and I get it, there's some open air preachers that they're just angry. They're bad, Westboro Baptist Church, and, I've seen it. Some people can be really harsh and angry when they're preaching. But, not aside from that, there are open air preachers with good hearts, and there are people that, guess what? And you see this on video all the time, is they'll come up to the open air preacher and then they'll condemn what they're doing and tell them to stop. And chances are the people that are telling the open air preachers to stop are Christians. You see these videos all the time, right? Oh, stop! No, I'm a Christian too. I just think you're just being too hard towards these people, right? You see this, it happens all the time. But the implication is, why can't you just live a good, peaceful life like me, right? And that's what I'm saying. This Mother Teresa quote, that's how people will take that. And again, at the end of the day, no, you need people verbalizing it to people. Okay? So, yeah. Any questions? No? Okay.
Like,
Go ahead.
you made a reference earlier about, preaching the gospel. And the Bible says, like, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel. So it's kind of like, it insinuates that you're standing in front of the person has sandals on, right? But then it's like in this century, it's like, well, TikTok and whatever, people are, sharing their take on the gospel, through those channels. So it's like, I wonder, I just wonder, like, about, how does God see it, like, from his throne room, like, when he's seeing all these, he knows all these TikTok videos and, like, YouTube and Instagram. I just find it interesting when it's like the word says how beautiful are the feet. So you assume that the person's like, maybe then that, they had sandals on and they were walking in dust, but now it's like, we have gym shoes and, we're communicating the gospel on our phone.
Yeah, no, we've seen a revolution with social media, and I don't want to diverge the topic to politics, but I kind of see where Trump wants to save TikTok. For us, it's more sociological. Like, oh, it's destroying young people. Their attention spans are terrible. They're, I get it. Like, I call it the TikTok Academy. People don't really know their stuff. They just know how to regurgitate some answer. You know what I mean? Like, the Council of Nicaea is when Christ was invented in 325. Like, I can't quote a book. It's just some TikTok person told me. You know what I mean? Like, but I see the value of communication, and I see the value of like, think of it today. Like, nowadays, you don't need to go to Iran or Pakistan and like, you just talk here. Like, remember what I've said, there's a 25% turnover rate in Islam very recently in Western nations. And it's not preachers, it's not apologists, it's literally the phone. Because they're looking at their phone and they're realizing, wow, their prophet was a pedophile. And it's undeniable. It is undeniable based upon Western standards, right? It's all through the phone. People are now coming to Christ. They're seeing the bankruptcy of Islam, and it's a lot of young people. And it's not through, and I've been engaged. I've been very heavily involved in Islamic apologetics like years ago. But now there's a real change. Yeah. So anyways, any other questions, guys?
I mean, it makes sense when we're all talking about it, and you cleared up a lot of different things, but I think part of the problem is sometimes, like, when I'm reading the Bible, like, I fall back on, like, sometimes, like, not my own understanding, but just, it's like, it may not understand it the way it's intended. And so that's, like, what I don't want to happen as I read the word, Yeah. Like, I just want it to manifest and for it to actually grow the way it's supposed to,
I gotcha.
So it's helpful to, like, go over these.
I gotcha. Let's finish here, guys, because hold on. I said we're gonna be an hour. Whoa, we're at an hour and 18 minutes. Sorry. Let's finish it here, okay? Can someone read verse 18 to 21? 18 to 21.
But I ask, have the people of Israel actually heard the message? Yes, they have. The message has gone throughout the earth, and the words to all the world. But I ask, did the people of Israel really understand? Yes, they did. For even in the time of Moses, God said, I will rouse your jealousy through people who are not even a nation. I will provoke your anger through the foolish Gentiles. To 20 or 19?
21.
21? Is that what you said? Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And later, Isaiah spoke boldly for God, saying, I was found by people who were not looking for me. I showed myself to those who are not asking for me.
Wow.
21.
Yep,
Excuse me.
yep. So here...
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
One more? Okay.
Sorry. No, you're good. So here, Paul quotes 3 passages from the Old Testament. So I think we can see in Romans 9 and 10 and 11, we're going to see next week, is that Paul is like interacting with the Old Testament, going back and forth. But verse 18, but I ask, have you not heard? Indeed you have, for, and he quotes Psalm 19 verse 4. Their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. So here he's talking about creation. Everyone knows that God is the creator of the world. In the same sense as the gospel, as that message goes out to the world, so the gospel goes out to the world. Verse 19, but I asked, did not Israel understand? Now he goes back to the belief of Israel. And here Paul quotes Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 21. And Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With a foolish nation, I will make you angry. So now, remember, Israel's disbelief, it's not today. It's not 2,000 years ago. It was way back 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, when they were eyewitnesses to the 10 plagues. We think that, if only God had some magical sign in the sky and says, I am God, I'll believe. You hear atheists say that. Well, guess what? Israelites actually witnessed something very similar. Fire, frogs, like all this unbelievable like pyrotechnics, still didn't believe. Because belief, it's not cognitive, it's from the heart. All this magic and evidence and all these things, it'll appease the mind, the cognitive faculty. But remember, this is a result of this. This, your mind, your beliefs, your worldview, your identity, is a result of this. What happens to you intuitively will shape this. Try being angry at a person, and I know what you're thinking. I'm not a psychic, it's just common sense. If you are angry towards a person, your cognitive faculties will constantly think of negativity towards that person. And I can sit beside you and convince you and say, they're not that bad of a person, and engage with your mind. But guess what? Your heart is angry. You see that? So at the end of the day, all the pyrotechnics it didn't do anything. It's a condition of the heart. You see, verse 20, then Isaiah is so bold as to say, and here he quotes Isaiah chapter 65, verse 1. I've been found by those who did not seek me. I've shown myself to those who did not ask for me. Okay, those who didn't even look, those who didn't pursue or look around, well, they found me. And guess what that's going to do? It's going to make the Israelites upset, right? Verse 21, but of Israel, he says, and here he quotes Isaiah 65, verse 2. So before 65:1, here's verse 2. All day long, I have held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. Okay? It's Isaiah chapter 65, verse 2. And the image that God gives here is that he waits. Remember, who are we to point the finger at as far as taking responsibility? Is it God or is it the Israelites? So chapter 10 is still about the Jews, ethnic Jews. The ethnic Jews that do not believe. The Pharisees, because this is written later on, to those that still don't believe. Well, guess what? It's their hardened heart. Okay? They're stubborn. They're being very ignorant and stubborn about it. Just like Paul opens up in the first two verses of chapter 10. Right? Verse 2 of chapter 10. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Verse 3. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God is utter ignorance that they have and complete stubbornness. And it's been a theme. It's been a theme of the nation of Israel. Okay? Israel's disbelief due to a hardened heart. Do you remember in the Gospels where Jesus says, can I have people read two passages and we'll close? Can someone read Matthew?
Yeah.
Matthew 23, 37 to 39. Matthew 23, 37 to 39. Can someone read that? Hands up. Can someone read that?
I'll read it.
Okay. And can someone read Acts 7, 51 to 53? Can someone else read that? Acts 7, 51 to 53. So
It was Matthew 23 what?
23, 37 to 39.
It's like breaking up what? 20
Matthew chapter 23, verse 37
Yeah.
to 39.
37 through 39? Okay. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Christ weeps, staying in front of Jerusalem and pleading with them. But remember, it's their hearts hardened. Okay? Acts 7. Did anyone read that? Acts 7, 51 to 53. This is Stephen, his final moments. Acts 7, 51 to 53.
Okay. You stubborn people, you're heathen at heart and deaf to the truth. Must you forever resist the Holy Spirit? That's what your ancestors did. And so do you. Name one prophet your ancestors didn't persecute. They even killed the ones who predicted the coming of the righteous one, the Messiah, whom you betrayed and murdered. To 53? Did you say 54? I'm sorry.
53.
53.
Yeah.
You deliberately disobeyed God's law, even though you received it from the hands of angels. Wow, that's heavy stuff.
So context, Acts 7 is about Stephen. And what did he? It's a long chapter. Go read Acts 7, guys, on your spare time. It's a long message, all on Moses, and it hit from history, back of his head, memorized it. Moses, the Israelites. But what's the theme? Stubbornness. Ironically, the guy that the author of the book that we're reading, the Apostle Paul, was present in Acts chapter 7. Right? So, again, there's a theme of consistent stubbornness that happens. Now, you ever have you ever dealt with someone that has a hardened heart?
Yes, today.
First of all, it's hard to deal with a hardened heart from yourself. Like, the hardened heart is like anger, unforgiveness, rage, frustration. Like, there's a heart, it does something to you. Okay? And if you've had a hardened heart, you've come out of it, you know what it takes. On top of that, try dealing with someone that has a hardened heart. That's in a state of anger. That's in a state of grief. And it's like, you know how to deal with it, but again, you're dealing with someone else. It's tough. You see how it plays with their mind, their actions. That's one person. Now think of a community. Now think of a nation. That's hard. That's hardened. And if you're saying, well, is that oh yeah, it's possible. There are people groups devoid of Christianity, all this discussion, that are hardened. They're just hardened towards a people group, right? Towards something from the past, towards etc. Right? You interact with someone that's indigenous, that's from America. Chances are they're going to have a hardened heart towards Americans, right? And, oh, this was our land, and all that. But there's a corporate hardening. You see that? And there's a corporate hardening when it comes to the Jews. So think of, we talked about this before, Acts chapter 15, or Luke chapter 15, the prodigal son, right? You have the prodigal son that could be representative of the Gentile that just goes away, squanders his inheritance, and then all of a sudden lives immoral, right, with prostitutes, eating with pigs. And he has this moment. He says, I want to come back to my father. And father embraces him, kisses him. But there's an older brother that was there. And he never ran away. He was always doing the work at the back, cleaning dishes, being responsible. And now they're throwing a party for their young, rebellious brother that came back. And guess what? Guess what comes into the older brother's heart? Envy. Jealousy. I did this. They did that. And they get blessed and I don't? How dare you, Dad? Right? And it's a good illustration of the Jewish people today. That a people, Gentiles, didn't do anything. Wasn't even looking for it, this chapter says. But they received the blessings, not because of us, because of Christ. Right? But them, they never...
Isn't it also a good representative of people that believe in salvation through works?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I lived this, I did this, Matthew 7. Right? Even to the Christians that do believe in faith, but also works too in their heart. Right? And then all of a sudden, some other, the envy that it does. Remember what he's saying with the prophecies, or when he's quoting, Isaiah chapter 65, verse 1, right? Saying, I've been found by those who did not seek me. I've shown myself to those who did not ask for me, right? And then he's, earlier, Deuteronomy 32, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. I will make the older brother jealous of the, right? Very similar. Again, this is Acts 15 or Luke 15 it's a parable, and obviously probably didn't happen, but it's a good illustration of what's going on. Now,
what was that, Deuteronomy?
Deuteronomy 32:21. That's what Paul quotes in chapter 10, verse 19. So where he says in verse 19, but I asked, did Israel not understand? First Moses says, quotes Deuteronomy 32:21. Yeah. Okay. So it's a good illustration to show where the Jews are at first century. Now, I will say 2,000 years has gone by. A lot of history has happened. But I would say, generally speaking, I think there's still a hardening on Israel right now. And this is just from what you see in, from the news and your interaction with people. Has there been a revolution when it comes to Jews coming to Christ? Do we hear about that? I'd like to hear about that in my lifetime. I'd love to hear about that. But has it happened? No. And this is what chapter 11 is going to be about. There will be a time where ethnic Israel, I don't know what that looks like, the percentage, I don't know, will come back. Okay? So, and I guess for next week we'll elaborate that on in Romans chapter 11. Okay?